Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Good morning. I think we can start. My name is Francesca Rosso. I work for the ETF, the European Training Foundation. For those who don't know me yet, welcome to this new webinar of the Network of Experts, the Skills Lab Network of Experts. This is the first event we organize after the summer and after we met with many of you during the live event hosted in June in Italy. It's a pleasure to see you again. There are also some news. There is a new team of experts working to support the Skills Lab network. You will see some of them today during this event. And also you will receive some written communication so that you can get to know them better. They will be with us for the next period of the network. And then there is also another news. We have been working in these few months on a platform where we will be able to discuss and to share ideas, to share knowledge. And this web platform is called Open Space. Some of you already know it. You will also receive some specific information about this platform, and you will be able to register so that you can follow all the activities of the Skills Lab and also post your ideas, your relevant research, and so on. All of this is under construction at the moment, but it will be finalized very soon, and you will receive information about that in the coming days. The webinar is about the new forms of work and platform economy in developing and transition countries. And the idea is to present new research and innovative methodologies that are used to quantify and to analyze the scope of platform work in these countries, and especially how the platform work affects skills demands and skills development. We will have two main sessions. We will start with the first session where our colleague Ivona Ganco from ETF will present ETF work on platform work and new forms of work in the Eastern Partnership countries and in the Western Balkans. And then we will have two relevant examples from Serbia and from Georgia about two different tools developed to understand the digital work in the countries. And then in the second session, we will have examples which go beyond the countries where we usually work. We will have one example from India about the rising phenomenon of platform work in India. And then we will also have the presentation of a recent research from Bruegel Institute examining how the data from online platform can be used to develop foresight about skills requirements and training needs. So let me just start by giving the floor to our head of unit, Manuela Prina, for some introductory remark and a welcome.
Good morning. I'm sorry I was battling with my microphone because I have difficulties to switch it on. But let me welcome all of you. It's really nice to see everybody this morning and really seeing your faces. For those who have the camera on, really bring a smile on my face, and it's really great to have the possibility to reconnect after the summer, but also to welcome many other colleagues that are joining in for the webinar this morning. As you know, the Skills Lab Network, it's an initiative we launched 1 year ago. Actually, this week is our first birthday anniversary. It was the 10th of November last year when we had the first event, and today, almost 1 year from that episode, we are reconnecting with everyone. It's a network that grew very much in a very short period of time. And it's a network that we have a lot of confidence in, that has an important mandate, which is to really bring together a community of researchers and practitioners that look at skills anticipation and matching as the core of the area of work we are following. And one of the, I would say, challenges, but also I would say transformation that we witness in our time is really related to the new forms of work and platform economy to be one of those areas where those new forms of work really take shape. It's something that we know that in all countries we have measures in place, studies, and also need to capture these phenomena better. This is something that impacts a lot also on the way we look at labor markets, but also at the way we look at skills demand, but also we look at how and which skills are needed in the labor market. We know that the new forms of work is not something that we live only today, you know, it's part of the history of humanity, and we always change in the way we work and in the way the labor market is constructed. But definitely those new forms of work, in particular connected to the digital environment, I would say slip a bit from the way we are used to look at labor markets and we are used to analyze phenomena. And I think more than ever, it's important that we take not only a local or national perspective when we look at the new forms of work, but we share internationally, not only because workers are much more, let's say, shared in a space which is the platform or is internet more in general, but also because these challenges that impact all countries are very important for constructing a way of looking at those phenomena, in particular when we ask ourselves the question, what is then the implication in terms of skills? That is what we are all working on. So I'm very happy that today's meeting is following on this subject, and I want to thank very much already all the speakers, but also the ETF team who is working to make this network a network of people, first of all, but also to give it a shape and make sure we have a space to exchange and continue our dialogue. So I wish everybody a fruitful morning, and I pass back the floor to Francesca.
Thank you, Manuela. Thanks a lot for this welcome, and also for reminding us the value of people in this network, the link between this community, which is building up. So let me pass immediately to the first session of this event. And I want to pass the floor, first of all, to my colleague and friend, Ivona Ganco from the ETF, who will present the recent results of two studies conducted in the Eastern Partnership countries and in the Western Balkans. Please, for Ivona, but also for other speakers, I will have to be very strict on the time. So I will notice you when 2 minutes are missing from the end of your presentation time, because I really want to preserve time for question and answer and exchange. So please, Ivona, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Francesca. I'm really extremely happy to be here today, and also seeing so many faces I know, but also newcomers to the network. It's a very nice subject we are talking today about. It's a pity we cannot meet in presence today, because actually I think that the area of work and new forms of work, digitalization would deserve a longer discussion. So I hope that after this webinar we can continue our discussion. And what we will do now is to share some of the findings, but also about the information and about our process, how we were approaching this area and the subject. And I'm sharing this presentation of the European Training Foundation with Eva Jansova, who has been working with me together from the very, very beginning on the subject. So I will focus more on the process and about the framework, conceptual framework that we build on the new forms of work and platform work. And Eva will then share some key findings from the research that we conducted for over now 2 years. If I could ask for to change the slide. So we looked basically at the ETF partner countries, and we first focused on 6 countries in Eastern Europe, where we were already noticing a very strong digitalization trends. And then we focused on 6 countries in the Western Balkans. So we basically started our work already in 2019 to conceptualize the subject, but effectively, actually, we started to work in the top highest moment of the pandemic. So it was really very timely to think how our way of work, interaction, and the way of living was also changing. On one hand, because of the digitalization, but on the other hand, also thanks to the digitalization. Currently, we are finalizing the regional report for the Western Balkans, and I hope that it will be published soon. But we published already 6 country reports for the Eastern Partnership countries, a regional report that was published last year, and we already published 6 country reports for the Western Balkan countries. What I want to underline here is also that it's not just ETF work. We worked very, very well within ETF with many experts who supported the work, both from a country perspective and regional perspective, thematic perspective. But we had a great support from PPMI from Lithuania. And in the Western Balkans, we also had a great support from the Public Research Institute from Serbia, who will then present the tool GigMeter just after the ETF presentation. So when we were approaching the subject, we thought about platform work as one of the new forms of employment. And actually, we looked at platform work as one of the elements of the bigger trends of digitalization, but also greening of the economies of automation. And we try to contextualize those new developments within those bigger trends of shifting from traditional workplaces and traditional work patterns through digitalization towards information society, but also to more flexible labor relations, remote employment, but also new flexible learning opportunities that are coming within the work, but also outside of work schedules. But first of all, we try to conceptualize. Actually, what we wanted to do is to place platform work and new forms of work in a more specific angle. And with this, we looked at different digital platforms, and we identified 2 types of platforms. One focus on more capital markets, and the other one that we then researched and analyzed further, that are digital labor platforms. The first are connecting different customers with clients who are providing, for example, goods or assets. They lend money, and we know them very well. Those are Amazon, Airbnb, or, for example, very prominent in the ETF partner countries, Etsy. but we wanted to focus on where actually the work was delivered. And this is why we focused on digital labor platforms that are connecting customers with workers, with professionals that are delivering work and they are delivering certain services. And we focus on those, well, at the very beginning, those who are the most prominent in the countries we wanted to look at and analyze further, looking at the opportunities those platforms could bring to the countries and to the workers. But actually, within this context, we were thinking, what is the platform work? Because we were looking from different angles and also researching secondary sources and the literature. And then we were dealing with gig economy, platform economy, collaborative economy. But we were lucky enough that in 2020, the European Commission, DG Employment, set quite an extensive definition, but actually that is summarizing very well what platform work is. So according to this definition, it's all labor that is provided through or mediated by online platforms and can cover different sectors. It's really, there is a huge variety of sectors and a huge variety of the forms of employment. Then what is very important are the three features of platform work. So it's always take place on digital labor platforms. So we have a platform involved and at least three parties are involved. So there is a platform, there are workers and there are clients. And the platform is mediating between professionals and the clients. And the third feature that is very, very important is the matching, that the matching is digitally mediated. So independently how the work is delivered, there is always this component of administration and mediation that is done digitally. And here we have also another element that is entering, algorithmic management. So very often there is no involvement of a human being in this matching. But what is very actually striking, that this matching is very, very effective. So with this already conceptual framework, we try to build a new methodology, how to approach actually those big trends and how to place new forms of work and the platform work in this context. So obviously we built a mixed methodology. With this approach, we focus on desk research, where we were analyzing country-specific issues, but also region-wide. We analyzed quantitative and qualitative data, and we looked very broadly on labor market developments, but also on labor market digital legislation. We looked at the data of atypical employment as well, including online remote work, but also levels of digitalization and also policy frameworks. This we combined with the interview program. This what we could afford. We could not follow a big panel survey, for example, but we covered very extensively interviewing stakeholders and very huge variety of stakeholders, from policymakers to platform workers themselves. In the Western Balkans, we adjusted the methodology and we conducted a stakeholder survey where we asked more on policy aspects, so about the priorities for action within those bigger contexts. The core of our methodology was actually big data analytics. So what we did with the colleagues from PPMI, we focused on automated data collection and analysis. So we developed a program to scrape information from the platforms that are the most prominent in the two regions and in the countries. And they were different, what we realized. So In the, for example, Eastern European countries, we had more global platforms on the market, but in the Western Balkans, we had more nationally grown local labor platforms. With this, we analyzed the data and we could code them for activity, gender, and occupation. And all this we triangulated with other automatically collected data sources. And the most important was online labor index developed by Oxford Internet Institute, that was the first one analyzing the provenance of platform economy globally. But then we were very, very lucky to work with our colleagues from Serbia, with Tanja and Branka, and we could use also the data collected by GigMeter in the 5 of the Western Balkan countries. And with this, we realized that actually we had to deal with kind of two big different labor platforms that were on location when the work was developed on location, so in situ or just remotely. But within those, we could also see two other types. So even if, for example, on location platforms were we had work delivered in person, it could be of different type. So we could see those platforms that were requiring more professional skills, like, for example, teaching, and those that were requiring broader skills, like, for example, ride-hailing or delivery platforms that are the most prominent. But within online freelancing, we also identified microtasking, like, for example, on Amazon Mechanical Turk, which actually is not so much prominent in the countries that we researched. But with this variety, we also came to the conclusion that we have a variety of aspects that we had to look at. So it's not only, of course, our entry point were skills dimension, but then we also looked at the legislation. We also looked at the social security issues, and also how the careers were developed or could be developed on the platforms. But
Ivona, sorry if I interrupt, but 2 minutes to go.
Yes, I pass the floor to Eva, who will just give a few highlights on what we found out in our research. Thank you very much.
And I will provide just few information on the results that on the evidence we gathered through the research that was introduced by Ivona. So what I would like to say, or what could be concluded on the basis of evidence on platform work gathered in the countries of Western Balkan and Eastern Partnership, we can say that first of all, digitalization and technological advancement challenge the standard labor market and bring new employment dynamics, which is of course connected with let's say the higher number of flexible work, casual contracts, more teleworking and so on. Then what we also found out that, or what we could conclude, that of course platform work offers new job opportunities, allow for flexibility, relative high earnings in comparison to the earnings in the countries. It also allows to enter the jobs or the labor market in an easy way. So it's lower entry barrier jobs, which is good for the newcomers, especially thinking about young people. And also there is no strong need for formal qualification in contrast to practical skills. So that's on the positive side. Also, what we looked at the profiles of the platform workers. So who are basically the winners that benefit most? We see very similar patterns in all the countries. Mostly it's young males from urban areas who are present on the platforms. For example, what is interesting that women tend to be less successful in remaining active also on the platforms and in securing sufficient amount of work on the platforms, which basically in a certain way mirrors also the existing trends on the standard labor markets. As in many countries, so there are the typical patterns which relates to the informal work, which is quite widespread. It's connected also with the unclarity on the status of such workers. And this also means that there is a lack of social protection, access to benefits, and overall security on the labor market. There are also inequalities that are present, as I already mentioned, vis-a-vis, for example, the gender division of success on the platforms. Then, since our main focus was on the skills, so what we could see that there is a clear divide between remote and on-location platforms in terms of skills and demand for skills. So in case of remote platforms, we see the demand for high skilled workers from, for example, ICT sector, creative industries. On the other hand, on location platforms don't require specialized skills, but despite of that, many workers with secondary and also tertiary education are present on the on-location platforms. What is also important that there is very limited or there are very limited opportunities for career developments and also skills acquisition through the platforms. And what is very important in terms of research and monitoring these new types of work or forms of work, that the evidence is very fragmented and there is no systematic or detailed data collection to understand this phenomenon. Of course, this is just to conclude, since our main entry point were skills. So what we would like to point out in terms of education and training provision, there is a clear need for developing key competencies. So for example, digital skills, communication, entrepreneurial skills, and so on. There is also a need to in supporting the workers with career management, providing counseling and so on, which could be also the role of public employment services. And of course, training. So continuing training and adult education is extremely important. And the last point that is connected with these training, for example, opportunities and skills development is of course the recognition of the skills, the validation and certification, which is missing in most of the cases. Thank you, and you can also find more information here following the links, finding more information on the Western Balkan and Eastern European countries.
Thank you, Eva, and thanks, Ivona. And sorry, Eva, for not having mentioned you and introduced you at the start of the presentation. Sorry also for interrupting or reminding the time, but it's just to preserve the time for having a meaningful discussion with all other participants. Thanks a lot for this, and let me pass the floor immediately to the next speakers that will present the example of GigMeter, which is an instrument to analyze the geography of digital work in Serbia and Southeast Europe. It was already mentioned by Ivona. We will have Branka Angelovic and Tanja Jacobi from the Public Policy Research Center in Serbia. Please, Branka and Tanja, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to see familiar faces and the ones that we haven't had chance to see before. So today we are going to present our instrument for providing insights into remote work from Serbia and Southeast Europe. Next slide, please. And while actually waiting, I must say that we as a team are very proud to have it developed and tested and working on it in last 3 years. As Ivona already mentioned, GigMeter is an instrument that is used for monitoring the key characteristics of digital workers in Serbia and 8 neighboring countries. What we do with this instrument is actually generating information about their gender, incomes, and occupation. I already said that we developed the instrument in December 2019. It was actually tested rather long time throughout the 2020 and finally really installed in its full sway in 2021 and 2022. You may ask yourself why we have decided to develop such an instrument, and the reason for us was very simple. When we started our research on platform economy, which was initiated in 2018, Serbia was already noted as a country with a noticeable supplier of remote platform workers to global digital platforms like Upwork, Guru, Freelancer, and the like. To be sure that we are really on the right track, we also conducted a meta-analysis in 2020, published in 2021, which aimed to showcase really what was the number of remote workers in Serbia. And our analysis, conservatively speaking, pointed out to 70,000 workers from Serbia working on these general platforms that I just mentioned earlier. Of course, during COVID-19, the platform work really skyrocketed globally and also skyrocketed in Southeast European countries, not only in Serbia, as you will see later. So what do we really do? The data we collect is actually collected by web scraping of publicly available data that we find on 3 most significant general platforms in our region. And these are, as I mentioned, Upwork, Guru, and Freelancer. These platforms actually are not playing prominently or are not having the same prominence in all 9 countries. If, for example, you would look to the example of Serbia, you will see that Upwork is more present. If you take an example of Hungary, you will see that Freelancer is actually a more popular platform than the other 2. Anyhow, all these 3 are selected based on our mapping as the most visible platforms in the 9 countries. How we do things? We collect the data, and you will see that later, based on an individual profile of each worker on these 3 platforms. What is interesting is that we collect really a massive amount of this data, which in a way represent almost 80% of the total number of active digital workers on the observed platforms. Also, not all the data that we scrap are easily accessible. Some data we need to process in a different manner, and we use this hybrid automated manual approach to determine necessary data, and these really relate to genders and to the occupations. So when you see, for example, a profile of an individual worker, you cannot see his or her gender, or you need to basically assume what genders they are. So this is what I mentioned earlier. This is why we use this automated process of deciding which genders are we talking about. When it comes to Serbia, we can also identify location, meaning the city and the region where people are from. When we talk about other 9, actually 8 countries, we are just looking into location in terms of countries. All the other remaining elements that you see below are collected for all 9 countries. Main and additional occupations. Ivana already mentions that all of us were guided by the Oxford Open Labor Index classification of occupations, and they're composed in 6 brackets. And you will see which those later. We also take information about hourly rates of our remote workers. We generate then later on their total incomes based on a number of completed jobs and number of jobs in progress. So all this might sound beautiful, and it is, but as in many let's say, approaches as gig meter is, there are many or plenty limitations. And we just listed some for you to understand what is that we can present and what is that we cannot. For example, when we talk about hourly rates, we are actually presenting the requested hourly rate of our gig meter workers, but not the one that they really get in the end of the day. We cannot provide the information on hours worked and not paid. You know that gig work in all its forms is really well known for this element. So our remote workers invest lots of time that is not really paid and not covered in gainings and projects. Gig meter cannot showcase that. Also, we cannot track individual, we cannot track projects. As I've said, we are just tracking the profile of gig workers, and based on these profiles, we are composing the story that is revealed to you through our gig meter reports. And of course, we cannot see people who are hiding profiles, and there are some like this. Next part of the presentation is going to be delivered by Anya, and she will show what is that we really can present through gig meter reports for Serbia and South Europe. Thank you.
Good morning from me. I will try to be very short. So one of the things we can see, as said, is regional distribution of digital workers. And this allows us actually to see that, for example, in Serbia, gig workers are mostly focused in Belgrade and Vojvodina, and in urban areas, meaning that 9 of 10 new entrants are living and working in the 28 cities and towns of Serbia. Regional distribution of occupations is the other thing we can also say something about, and what we see is actually that all occupations are now equally represented in all 4 regions, though it doesn't mean that every region is as good in these occupations as others. So we can say which region has a certain better position, or it's more focused on a certain occupation. Then we also track gig workers by gender, and as we said, women are less represented among the workforce, with say about 35% of gig workers being women, and this percent is getting better actually, and more women are joining platforms, as we can see in the next result, which was taking earlier this year. In the region, of course, we also see, as Branka already mentioned, where workers from different countries are heading in sense of platforms. So you see that Romania and Hungary are now only countries which are not most represented on Upwork, but rather choose other platforms to work on. Here is the distribution of digital workers by occupation in all 9 countries. What we can see from this is that actually creative and multimedia and software development are the most represented ones, while others are less represented. Professional services being on the last place. Which is unfortunate, let's say, because this is one of the most paid professions globally. Total income, we see that the women generate 84% of the average earnings for men. This is better than the global average, but it's still not good, meaning that we have inequalities which are mainly actually originating from the offline work, let's say, environment in which women are also less represented in better paid professions. Here you can see hourly rates. Again, women are less paid, sometimes because they ask for a price which is lower. Women also usually work in less paid professions, which is again one thing with what we know from the offline work. Then Branka comes again.
And this is really our last slide. You can see how gig meter can be used. It has at this moment several applications. One is really to showcase in comparative practice how the digital labor market looks in the 9 countries of Southeast Europe. Also, it can help, and this is what has been going on in Serbia, in defining new policies with regards to remote workers. And of course, over time, it provides information of trends in the countries that we have been observing, and the countries that we have already listed. So we hope to have a new format of GigMeter as of 2023. We welcome you to visit our website. Thank you for your time and for your attention. That's all.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Tanya and Branka, also for trying to keep it short. Sorry again, very interesting research. I'm sure that there will be questions about what you just presented. Let me just introduce the last presentation of this first session, and Ania Diakonidze from the Tbilisi State University of Georgia will take us through the profile of platform workers and their working conditions in Georgia.
Thank you, Francesca. I hope you can hear me. So good morning or good afternoon, dear colleagues. My research project will actually take you to a very specific component of platform work, which is, as Ivona classified it, it's an online labor platform, but the work itself is implemented physically. So I'll be talking about food delivery careers in Tbilisi, and this is a research project which is funded by the Tbilisi State University. So why there are different angles to look at the platform work, and in this case, my particular interest was to look at the social security issue of the platform workers, although in the course of the research, of course, many other topics are emerging. Why is it an important and interesting question? It's because the literature on platform work, which focuses on advanced economies, highlights one of the key concerns is that platform workers, by definition, cannot be involved in national social security insurance systems like unemployment insurance or health insurance, etc., because they do not have an employee status, but rather they operate under the status of a partner, and that is actually something that we see in all countries across the globe, more or less. However, the thing is that in Georgia, and much like in other post-Soviet countries, I would say the social security systems, let's say statutory social security systems, are not really well developed. So we don't really have an unemployment insurance. With the only insurance-based system that we actually have is just the pension insurance, which was introduced only a couple of years ago, and the labor rights and conditions of general workers, even those who work offline, are not really well protected. So that gives leads us to the question then: what is how should we conceptualize a social security problem of platform workers? So this is I already talked about some issues from this slide. I just wanted to to make it aware the context of Georgia is, as I mentioned already, social security systems are not that well developed, and plus we have a situation with quite high unemployment and high informal employment, which again I assume is more or less the same for other Eastern Partnership countries. Now, going to the research itself, this is, I should mention, this is my second project on platform workers. In my previous project, I focused on ride-hailing drivers, but today I chose to present about careers because in this project I'm combining qualitative as well as quantitative methods, and it's very much work in progress. So you should be aware that what you see on the slide is basically there's still more focus groups and interviews to be conducted, and the online survey, which is currently posted to in the group of the online group of careers, is it is still open. It is still collecting answers, and up to now 87 answers have been recorded. You might have a question. If you have questions about methodology, we can talk about it later. But basically, I had a very the sampling of this survey is very much a convenience sample, because companies that I approached in Georgia were not willing to share the database in any way. So it's because I wasn't able to do a random sample, for instance. So, but let's see where it leads. Up to now, so I'm combining. I will be presenting like combined picture of what the qualitative and quantitative data tell us. And of course, the profile is very interesting, but of course, when it comes to careers, it is a little bit specific because probably you have this image that, you know, careers in most of the countries are actually young and male, and that is also what I see from my data at the moment. So it's primarily male, but actually I would say that quite some unexpectedly high share of female, because I expected them to be much less. So it's 88% at the moment of the respondents who said that they are male, and average age is also quite young. So one of the main interest points for me was to see whether this is their main occupation or they are doing it as a side job. And this is a very important question also from a theoretical point of view, because it has serious implications for the social security issue in advanced economies, and we also know that in high income countries, people are mostly doing this as a side job. But as opposed to this, we see that in Georgia, 65% at least at the moment have reported that they are doing it as their main job. And when we say main occupation, now I have to rely on their definition of what is main occupation, because we're not talking about an 8-hour job here. When they say main occupation, we mean that this is their primary and almost only source of income, and they work much more than 8 hours on this. I will have this on the next slide. Also, another important question is that I'm asking is about their prior working experience. And the reason for this is that there is currently an interesting trend development going on the Georgian labor market, which is in a way fueled by pandemics. We see that service sector is complaining about the lack of workforce, and in some instances we have seen that big businesses are directly pointing at the online platforms as stealing their workforce. So in that sense, we see some so the primary findings actually point to the fact that this is in a way could be true, because almost half of the workers of the careers reported that they have been in formal employment before joining platforms, and out of them, about half of them said they worked in service industry, and namely in hotel, tourism, and so the fun and entertainment industries. But also quite large share said that they worked, but they worked without contract, so they did informal work. It is again, there's we are not talking about very big numbers, but still I think it shows some trend that a number of people turning towards platforms increased significantly during pandemics, and this is also confirmed by the findings by the qualitative part of the research, where most of the participants in the focus group said that the pandemic was a main driver for them to quit their jobs in service sector and shift to platforms. Working conditions is another another topic which I'm focusing and I'm trying to study in a quite detail. And as I said, so again, the issue with platform work is when we speak about earnings or working conditions, it all depends on how much time these people spend on working on platforms. So in a way, we have to, what I've been trying to conceptualize in qualitative part is to find out what is really let's say, so there are basically two groups that can be distinguished. Those one group that are called co-workers, who are doing, as you see, when we ask about hours per week, they on average they report 47 hours per week. There are some outliers, of course, which report much longer hours, but this is an average figure. And for side hustlers, but so for those who do it as a side job, they say 33 hours, which was quite a, I would say, interesting finding, because it would not really fit in a definition of a side job when you do it for 33 hours per week. But it seems like in Georgia, this even for those careers who are not doing it as a main occupation, they still do give it quite a lot of weight in their work. Careers of all age and gender who participated in the interviews and focus groups basically agree that in order to have a meaningful income, and I will explain what they call meaningful income, they need to work at least 10 hours per day. And of course, this work comes without access to any of the labor guarantees that is guaranteed by the labor code. That is, this we already know by definition. This is what the conditions that they work in. So when it comes to earnings,
have 2 more minutes.
Yes, I'm almost done. When it comes to earnings, so this is again some figures. This is how the distribution looks like. This is earnings, and sorry, this is in Lari. So you should divide it by 3 more or less to get estimations in euro. But just the bottom line is that basically the earnings, if they work 8 or 10 hours per day, is quite good for Georgian standards. It and they have explicitly mentioned that earnings is one of the main attractors for actually doing platform work, because it really provides opportunity to have a really meaningful income compared to the very low paid service sector jobs. And just 2 more slides is that when it comes to social security, of course, the interesting part here is that almost all, well, 92% at the moment are saying that they are registered as small or micro entrepreneurs, which by Georgian tax law means that they are they're not paying income tax. They will only have to pay income tax if they pass the threshold of 30,000 Lari annual income, which many don't. So many of them don't have that much income. But interesting part here is that even though platform workers complain, or let's say they are aware of the lack of social security, at the same time they are not willing to participate in any state social insurance system, even if it existed in Georgia. So basically the reason why they register as small and micro entrepreneurs, on the one side, it is because in some cases companies require them to do so, and otherwise they cannot sign a contract with a company. In other cases, some companies they don't have such a predetermined approach, and they just provide information to their workers that they can register as small and micro entrepreneur. And in that, because so the main the whole deal about registering as an entrepreneur is that if you don't register, then you have to pay 20% income tax plus 2% pension contribution, and this is something that platform workers have named as to be unfair. I'm quoting again, they say it's unfair that the state is taking so much money from the work they do, so they of course prefer to register as into small entrepreneurs and pay much less. Nevertheless, they do not so they think about immediate benefits basically, rather than thinking about potential social security that their contributions could bring. And well, to conclude is just some of the main. What I would like to highlight is that such a let's say the disposition of workers, platform workers, who they basically see this platform work as something temporary, and everybody wants to move out of it. And when, as in previous presentations, you talked about skills development and implications for careers. The thing is that almost none of the platform workers see this job as something that they would be doing for entire of their life, and but at the same time they do not exactly see how they can exit, and then we see people who consider it short term, but they are doing this already for 5 years, and that basically clearly shows that they do not know how to exit the situation apart from just leaving the country. And at the same time, this issue of registering as in micro entrepreneurs, I think that really exacerbates the situation. It increases the share of disguised self-employment because well, in reality they are in an employment relationship. However, this field of the platform economy is completely unregulated in Georgia. Therefore, there's not even a discussion about the fact whether they are employees or self-employed. But in practice, I don't want to go into that discussion. But as we know, there's quite some discussion in different parts of the world ongoing about reclassifying these workers. However, at the moment, it really leads to the situation when there are lots of people registered as small entrepreneurs, but we just don't really know who exactly are self-employed and who are disguised self-employed. I will stop here, and I'll be happy to answer your questions if you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Anna. And I think your presentation spots a light on something which is very interesting, also the diversity of this group of platform workers. We have heard that in the beginning of the ETF presentation, how many different groups of platform workers exist, and that has an implication on the expectations, the learning, the skills development, the career, and of course also the social protection issues. So actually we exceeded our time, but I really want to give time to the people to exchange. So my proposal is that we take the time which was originally foreseen for the short coffee break to allow people to exchange. You have a button with reactions on the right hand side on the bottom of your screen. Please use that to raise your hand if you want to ask a question. For the sake of time, I will be collecting a few questions, and then I will ask our speakers to react so that we, pull them together. I see Ellie. Okay, Ellie, I see you with your hand raised physically, not digitally, but please.
Thank you very much, Francesca. What I heard today is very, very enriching, and I learned a lot. But I would like to ask, were there any conclusions or findings about the skills? I know that the digital skills are mostly important, but I'm asking about skills like self-learning or teamwork or creativity. Those skills, were they part of the research or not? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ellie. Other questions? Okay, I don't see questions or hands raised. Oh, maybe Mirela. I see.
Yes,
okay.
Good morning to everyone, and congratulations to all of the speakers for the very good presentations, and especially for the hard work behind the results of these presentations. I have one or two questions to address to Tanya and Branka. I wanted to discuss more in detail about the gig meter, and I want to know the differences between Serbia and other countries in terms of limitations, the opportunities that it can offer. And the second question, again about the gig meter, I wanted to ask this question. I know that there are challenges, and still it's a work in progress, and it will improve in the future. What if the government intervenes with policies that can, for example, obligate workers to apply in one specific platform. It's just an example. It can help in this way to collect more data, because they will have, because workers are obligated to apply in that specific platform, and the results will change, I think, because at this stage, I know that they are using 3 main platforms, but they are still limited. They don't cover all the information, all data that is present in the country. And this is also one of the main challenges of big data, not only for GigMeter, but for every type of application of the big data. Thank you very much.
If I understood well, for the first question, GigMeter collects data on individual workers, as we said, not projects. So in this way, it really is different to the OLE index. So those data cannot be compared, if that was the question. And for the second one, actually here we presented, GigMeter actually measures only general platforms. But in real life, workers in Serbia work on numerous platforms. So maybe more than 100. We don't know that because there are a large number of platforms, and some workers work on specialized platforms, which are, for example, 99 Design and similar. And then a lot of workers who are, for example, translators, work on platforms which are focused on translation. And a larger number of workers in Serbia work on digital platforms from China, Philippines, and Japan, for example, teaching English lessons. So in that respect, it would be completely impossible for the government to really channel workers on one platform, but it can do something if it wants to, maybe to upgrade their skills, mainly, for example, in dealing how to learn skills to actually apply for platforms, because it takes usually 6 months and 1 year for workers to get the first job on the platform, because they're not very good, or they need more sources to actually to understand how they should apply and how they should write the project. So from that point of view, we don't expect anything to change. What we see is that some countries are making contracts with platforms to provide them with data about workers from the given country, and then having a better perspective on how to collect tax for the tax purposes. If I didn't answer any of your question, please.
Thank you very much for the answer.
Thank you, Tanya. We had a pending question from Ellie, who wants to respond to that.
I will be very, very happy to respond. It's a very, very actually important question as well. Well, due to the time limitation, we could not share all the results of the research, but obviously, indeed, we asked during the interview program about the skills and competences needed in the platform work, or in a remote or on location work. These sets of competences are actually slightly different. This is what I was also mentioning while making a division between different types of platform work. So on one hand, what we see very prominent are really strictly connected skills to competence, to occupations, so all linked to professional development, and then a professional application of skills. But then we also see very prominent transversal skills. So we looked from the framework built at the EU level. So basically what we call them at the EU level are key competences. So all key competences are actually very important. And this is one of the actually policy lessons that we got from our research. So on one hand, we have those occupational skills, but then we have a big set of skills that are linked to communication, of course, a part of digital skills. Digital skills we take for granted that they are very important, different degrees, but they are very important. But then communication, learning to learn what just Tanya mentioned, how to approach a project, how to approach platform work. But also what we found out is that platform workers, they need to be very entrepreneurial. Entrepreneurial in the sense of taking the initiative for getting the job, for setting the price for their work, etc., etc. So with this, well, what we call key competences, they can be called also in a different way, like, for example, 21st century skills. That is also another very prominent term. But we see this very wide range of skills that are also directing us more towards future jobs. That basically we see that those are more and more more prominent and very much needed. And this is a big also a message to education and training systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivona. I see we still have time for one question. Irina, please. Maybe you want to also introduce yourself. We cannot hear you. Your mic is off. Can someone from the technical team? Okay.
Now,
it's
okay.
off.
I'm sorry. Hello to everybody. I am happy to see all of you since in-face meeting in June, and I'm happy that we start to work again. And I would like to thank Annie for very interesting presentation of research that I was not aware before. And I have a question to her, if possible. It's a bit, maybe a little bit comment, but question as well. She has mentioned many challenges that these people meet during their work. And as a person living here, and we all are already integrated to this system of deliveries, I would pay particular attention to two issues from my point of view. And my question is whether she approached or not to these issues in her research. The first of all is issue related to the wasting of the skills, because I'm interested if she studied, for example, educational level of people working there, how the activities they are doing now match to their professionalism in their skills. This is the first issue. And the second question is related to the security on the road, which, as far as I am aware, is a very painful issue for people working in delivery services, because due to the situation on the road, there are very often accidents, and as their payment is often, their work is not regulated actually, so their payment and size of their salary depends very much on the number of deliveries they would manage. So my question is, did she approach it in her research on these two issues, which I consider to be very important in my country? Thank you in advance for your answer.
Okay, shall I go, or are we still collecting answers? Questions, sorry.
I think you can reply. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Irina. Yeah, as I mentioned at the beginning, there are so many angles that we can study platform work from. I will start maybe with the second question about physical security of these workers. And this is especially a burning point for careers, I agree, although it was not like my exclusive focus, but it did come up in the focus groups, that it is one of the main concerns for careers, because as you rightly mentioned, the more you work and the faster you deliver, the more you earn. So it's part of algorithmic management, as already mentioned by Ivona, and we know about this phenomenon from the literature. Yes, there have been cases. There are cases, and quite some. I'm member in the several Facebook groups of careers, so I follow this daily, and there are quite some injuries. Some of them are quite quite substantial. What the company started to offer is that actually there are 3 main delivery companies in Georgia, and two out of them are offering insurance against so how do you call it in English? Not medical insurance, but incident insurance. So if someone has if a career has something has happened, so there is insurance that they will reimburse the cost. But this system has its flaws, because as careers describe it, if an incident happens, they need to report under certain, I think, within an hour or so. So which basically means that if someone is so badly damaged, I mean, of course they cannot start filling in application form in their mobile. So therefore, sometimes they said there have been cases when there really has been an incident, but the courier was not able to claim the benefit. So that just, well, as far as I can tell you, but I'm not really measuring, the extent of these happenings, but it is clearly one of the major concerns. As for the education and the waste of skills, I plan to incorporate this question in the online survey, so as to have more robust statistical figures that I can report about it. But at the moment, I can. Well, you asked whether they are using the skills, but I mean, they're. Oh, clearly they're not, because, a vast majority of these people are, as I said, they are students from various backgrounds. Some were, I had, careers, some of them are studying law, others are studying, arts. It really varies. And of course, in that sense, we can, of course, speak about the waste of skills, because the job that they're doing is in no way linked to what they're studying at the university. That's why they themselves, if I may quote again, they say this job is a trap. So that's how they describe it, irrespective of age, I should say, especially younger participants in the focus groups, and they, as I said, they see as something short term. But again, of course, because they are, the work does require to be technology savvy, and that probably explains why we have so many younger people joining it, as opposed to more older people.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Anna. And I thank all of you for the very lively discussion. I'm really sorry we exceeded the time, and I apologize for the next moderator, to Terence. I just want to say like a couple of words about what we have heard now. I took note of the opportunities and challenges of the platform economy, the inequalities when it comes to gender issues, and also to the different groups, which make it compulsory, I would say, to adopt tailored solutions. Tailored solution also needed to different socioeconomic context. The context that Anna, for instance, presented is very different from the socioeconomic difference of some other more developed countries, and that's why I think that very specific measures will be needed. I cut it here, and I won't take more time, and I hand over to Terence for the next session. Thank you. Thanks to all.
Oh, thank you, Francesca. What we'd like to do in this session is to move beyond ETF partner countries and look at what's going on elsewhere in the world. So I'm very pleased that we have a presentation from Dr. Sakshi Khurana from the National Institution for Transforming India about platform working in India. And this is particularly interesting given that India is at the frontier in very many respects in developing platform work. And secondly, we have a more sort of global perspective from Fabian Stephanie from the Oxford Internet Institute at the University of Oxford, who will be providing some insights into how to measure, how to understand the emerging skill needs. And just to pick up on one of the questions, which was one of the questions made in the previous session, what are the skill needs? I think each respective report on which these presentations are based actually do provide some insights into emerging skill needs and how potentially those skill needs will be met. So first of all, I'll hand over to Dr. Sakshi Khurana, who will outline the situation in India. And like in the previous sessions, there's 15 minutes, and I'll give an indication when you're 2 minutes from the end. So Dr. Khurana, I hand the floor over to you.
Right. Good morning and good afternoon. Am I audible? Can everyone hear me? Great. So
Yeah.
thank you ETF and the organizers for inviting me and my colleagues who have also joined, Professor S.K. Shashikumar and Dr. Balakrishna Pari, who have contributed to this report. So as you can see, this report is from NITI Aayog, which is the public policy think tank for Government of India. So this is a first of its kind report in the context of where we attempted to review evidence, to gather and analyze evidence to feed into policy. So we constituted an expert research team to undertake work towards this study. So we've gathered evidence based on research from within India and globally for this study. India, as many of you might be aware, is one of the largest digital markets in the world, and a huge proportion of internet users are young people, increasingly who have increasing access to smartphones, to low-cost internet, and are keen to take up jobs in the gig and platform economy. So we also have a trend of rising urbanization in the country. So this report, which we have come up with, attempts to give projections, to give estimates of the workforce in the sector using data with assumptions from the National Labour Force Survey. It looks at both the opportunities and the challenges in this. The study also documents examples from across the world on initiatives, on regulations, as well as social security initiatives for gig and platform workers, to come up with recommendations on social inclusion for the sector, for skill development for the platform economy, for social security and worker welfare, as well as future estimates of the workforce. We also give suggestions for future research in the sector. So our some of the suggestions for future research are on studies on small platforms, on women-run platforms, and platforms' contribution to GDP, and so on. So the study, first of all, from the National Labour Force Survey, estimates that at present we have 7.7 million gig and platform workers in India, who constitute nearly 2.6% of non-agricultural workforce. This is expected to rise to 23.5 million by 2030, and which is likely to be 6.7% of non-agricultural workforce in 2030. We have also done a mapping of skills for the future in the sector. So what we find is that by 2030, there is going to be increasing polarization in the workforce, with a rise in both low-skilled and high-skilled workers, which is expected of the larger technological trends leading to polarization of skills in the labor market. The study also talks about certain legislative and other policy initiatives which have relevance for gig and platform workers. We have the Code on Social Security, which was passed by the Parliament in 2020, for which rules are to be made both by the central or federal government as well as different state governments. So state governments are yet to frame and notify some of the rules. So this is still under process. But this legislation recognizes gig and platform workers as a distinct category of workers. The Social Security Code also talks about benefits for gig and platform workers with contributions from aggregators, platforms, and the government. The study also mentions about a recent initiative which the Ministry of Labour has undertaken of establishing an electronic platform called the eShram, where different unorganized sector workers can register and they can avail social security benefits such as accident insurance. So this is also an initiative which is evolving. A lot of workers have started registering on this platform. So this, along with the other data which this report has presented of the workforce, can really feed into different policies for gig and platform workers. So this report, which we have come up with, also talks skills for the platform economy, and also how existing government as well as private initiatives can be leveraged to meet the requirements of skills in the platform economy. We have identified through a review of literature skills that are important for the gig and platform sector, such as technical skills, digital skills, communication, and collaborative skills, as well as financial literacy, so that workers can use financial digital apps and digital payments, which are very important for functioning in the sector. We have challenges based on a review of studies that especially in terms of skill development, we find that workers have reported skills mismatch in the sector, especially workers on online web-based platforms sometimes have more skills than that are required by the tasks that they are undertaking. Also, skill upgradation can be a challenge for many workers since skill development opportunities offered by platforms are limited. So workers who are working remotely on online platforms may have only minimal interaction with other workers. So exchange of knowledge on skill development and upgradation can be limited. We also know that in this sector, it's skills is more about the number of tasks that the workers has completed. So that's what ascertains a worker's qualifications or accomplishments. So portability and showcasing of their skills is very important, which often becomes a challenge when the lack of portability of a worker's accomplishments. So based on our study, we have come up with certain recommendations. First of all, just to give an overview of the skill ecosystem in India, we have a centralized Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship that coordinates with different agencies on different skill initiatives in the country. We have for Vocational Education and Training, which is a regulator to assure quality assurance. We have the National Skill Development Corporation, which is a public-private entity that guides a lot of sector skill councils and private training providers to involve them in the process of skill training. We have the Directorate General of Training, which has around 15,000 industrial training institutes under it, which are regulated, and these industrial training institutes spread across the country are providing skill training in a number of for young candidates, young students. So that is the skill ecosystem, the largest skill ecosystem that we have. So the study comes up with a number of recommendations to leverage existing skill initiatives and also to come up and introduce new skilling initiatives for gig and platform workers. So we talk about platform-led skill training, where platforms can tie up with the Ministry of Skill Development and National Skill Development to nurture skilled workers and also to encourage micro-entrepreneurship. They also need to encourage on-the-job learning, apprenticeships for workers so as to get them trained hands-on. Platforms also need to have skill certificates or skill badges that can be displayed on the online profile of workers. This will help in career progression and skill upgradation of workers. Platforms also have a role in training workers who are part of the informal sector and not yet a part of the gig and platform economy, such as workers in the construction, workers who are drivers with other cab services, and so on, so that they have a chance to improve their earning through entering the sector and through professionalizing their skills. Also, our study recommends that the potential of platform-led skilling should be included in the national skill development and entrepreneurship policy, and all roadmaps roadmap and strategies that are made in India so as to include this sector and to meet the needs of skill development in the gig and platform economy. We also for greater need for showcasing of skills and portability, which is one way is through skill badges, skill certificates. There is also an example in the Netherlands of Gig CV, which is a CV which is displayed online of gig workers, which can ensure portability of data on skill credentials, work experience, reputation, performance, and so on. We already have institutionalized recognition of prior learning. So a lot of workers who have skills through informal learning skills that are passed on from one generation to another, for instance, can be made a part of the formal skilling system through the recognition of prior learning. So for the gig and platform sector, also recognition of prior learning, where there is certification of existing skills, can play an important role for workers to be able to upgrade their skills and have better opportunities. We also have an eSkill India portal, and a lot of content, a lot of skills information can be further aggregated in the portal so as to encourage workers to be able to showcase their skills and enable them to harness, to tap opportunities for employment. We also need skill training programs designed specifically for women, for persons with disabilities. Especially for women, we need outcome-oriented skill development program, also programs that can help them with asset ownership, with access to digital skills and technology. We need more awareness programs, especially for women workers, given that women often may not be aware of skill development opportunities. This needs to be supported with other initiatives such as better infrastructure and work design to create a more enabling environment for women. So I'll stop here. Just one last slide on future work on skills, which we have suggested is we need more work on informal work and skills training. We need more studies on skill development challenges and initiatives for women workers. We also need similar studies for persons with disabilities. Also, more studies for approaches for future skills training. So that's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I must say I very much enjoyed reading your report, and we can provide a link so people can access that if they wish. I'd like to move on now to a presentation from Fabian Stephanie, who I think takes a more global perspective and uses data from a variety of sources, I think including the USA, to indicate how online platforms can provide some information about skill needs and also how those skill needs might be met. So I'll hand the floor over now to Fabian, and just to mention the international reach we have this morning. I believe Fabian is currently in Kenya, but Fabian, I'll hand the floor to you.
Terence, thank you very much for these kind words, and also to ETF for the invitation, and happy to see so many colleagues from all over the world joining. Yes, indeed, I'm joining from Kenya. I hope we had a bit of a hassle with the internet this morning, and I hope this is not going to affect this talk. It's a great pleasure to have the opportunity to talk about something that fits very well with the very interesting research that I had the privilege to see already being presented here today. Though it is a bit like myself in research on the borderline. So I've been between gig work and the conventional economy, so to say. So because just like myself, I've been working for the last years with at the OII with the iLabor initiative, led by my colleague, Professor Willy Le Donwerter, where we studied the emergence of online labor markets and how to measure them. And now with my own research project at the OII, at the Oxford Internet Institute, moving more forwards to speaking about work in a more general terms. So speaking about also not only online mediated or gig work, but also conventional forms of work. And this is the first working paper stemming from this research group, the SkillScale group, and I'll talk a bit more about the group towards the end of my presentation. It's a working paper. It's hopefully soon to be submitted with a research policy. So it's in the very last brush-up round. And it has the title, What is the Price of a Skill? What we're looking at here is how to make assessments, assertions about reskilling and the value of skills in the future of work using online generated data. But I would love to start with the bigger picture. So the bigger picture, and I think this is something that we not only as gig researchers, but I mean, looking at the economy in general can relate to, is that we've increasingly seen over the last years with a new wave of technological change that technological automation is putting firms, workers, and governments alike under pressure. Maybe not so much as presented in this picture by very smart robots taking over work and putting, human contribution to the labor market to the margins. But of course, we can all relate to to so-called smart AI algorithms, so algorithmic technologies that are more and more influencing our labor market. But the picture is a bit more nuanced than that. It's not as grim as this picture shows. There is also an alternative idea, an alternative narrative to this, and that is that automation might have positive effects for some of the work that we do, in the sense that it might allow us to outsource some of the tasks that we're not so keen in doing, and some of the repetitive tasks, and actually allowing us greater fulfillment, greater freedom, greater creativity or more creativity, and focusing on what humans are in running with and not against the machines are good in when it comes to work. So, but to summarize this, the big picture is actually very complicated when it comes to the effects that automation and technological change has on the labor market. There are at least two effects that we've noticed and that have been over the last decade or last 20 years been very well established in economic research when it comes to technological change in labor markets. And that is one, that a specific type of old skills are being automated, thinking about repetitive work. And that on the other hand, with emerging technologies, with new software, for example, when we look at the field of design, which is a very fascinating field to examine, we see with the emergence of new technologies, new software, new skills, how to work with this software, work with these technologies are also being required. So we have these kind of conflicting tendencies, and they lead to something that we could call a skill mismatch or labor market mismatch that has very negative consequences on the individual, but also on society as it retards growth. It fosters economic inequality. We see this very interestingly summarized, and it stems from a working paper that we've been doing with a policy paper that we've been doing with the Bruegel think tank in Brussels, where we looked at the Beveridge curve on the right-hand side, so showing the vacancy rates contrasted with the unemployment rates in the European Union. And we see that after the financial crisis, we see a tremendous shift upwards, meaning that at a given level, constant level of unemployment, we do see significantly rising vacancy rates. So companies, in particular in ICT, have difficulties filling their positions, have difficulties finding talent. And this is a very concise representation of this skill mismatch. So we are in the difficult situation that people have to constantly reskill. I think the days of front loading, of learning something in school or university and keeping the skill set for the rest of your life and applying it successfully, sustainably, inclusively, these days are over. And this brings us to the central question of this work, which is relevant not only in the gig economy, but in the conventional economy as well. And that is how to identify valuable skills. And we'll talk about what I mean with value and what is it that determines the value? So why is it that some skills, that some particular types of skills, and often we think of programming languages, for example, so people who are capable in programming in Python, for example, why are these skills so valuable? What makes them so valuable, so much appreciated on the labor market? And how could we make a larger share of the population move towards these more sustainable and more valuable skills? And the data sources that we would like to use are, and that's the good news, I would make the argument, freely available. This is a summary from the working paper, the Bruegel policy paper that I mentioned, where we looked at whether we could use online generated data, so data that's been generated on platforms, various platforms on the internet, to make any assertions about what is going on labor markets, entering this new data-driven domain of labor market research. And we contrasted various sources, data sources. And what's maybe most interesting in this context is the very last row, because we noticed that when it comes to the availability of information about what is going on labor markets, online labor platforms, so online gig work platforms like Fiverr, like Upwork, like People Power, are actually very, very interesting data sources, because in contrast to other sources, they have a very, very granular and rich spectrum of data that they cover, from the demand side to the supply side, and even giving us information about the negotiation process between the two, between demand and supply. And this is what I wanted to showcase here, maybe just very briefly, because most of you are familiar to this. The data stems from the iLabor project work that we've been doing at the OII. I invite you all, if you're interested in our work, to have a look at the online laborobservatory.org. That's a collaboration that we concluded 2 years ago with the International Labour Organization. And let us have a look what we've been doing with this data from online labor markets. So in a nutshell, we've been applying a new type of methods. So we've been trying to look at these markets and the skills and the workers there in a holistic fashion. I don't want to get into too many details, but I think I have to show this in order for you to understand the process of this. We've been approaching this data in a network fashion. And what we've been doing is that we've been regarding skills as individual nodes in this network, in the sense that a node in this network would be connected if it's jointly used, if two skills are jointly used by the same worker. So if two workers, for example, apply machine learning and Python in their projects, in their online projects on these online labor markets, they would be connected in a network. And this network has the big advantage that it gives us a very concise, in one picture, representation of how skills are related on online labor markets. And this is taken from our recent work. This is how such a network looked like. This is a network of almost 1,000 skills. Again, the skills are the little nodes, and they are connected if they've been jointly applied in a project by a worker. So if a worker has put them to application. And what's already interesting at this, and this is just a descriptive representation, is that we see clusters emerging in this network, that we see pretty natural clusters. For those of you who are familiar with online mediated work, natural clusters emerging. So we have skills that are focused on design, for example, on the right side. We have skills that are more in the realm of software development and tech, like machine learning, Python, and database design here, or for example, we have writing skills, academic writing, and creative writing up here. So various clusters of skills that have emerged. But we do not only have the relationship of these skills with each other, we also have the value of the individual projects in which they have been applied. And that's a very, very interesting aspect. Again, when we come to data sources, that's a very interesting and unique from our, with our economists' mind perspective, a very unique feature of these online labor markets, because it allows us to calculate something maybe even more precious than the relationship, and that is the price, the premium that a specific skill has. I'm not going to get into great detail about the formulas here. We tried various modes. This is just one of them. But what we did is essentially we compared, by keeping many other things constant, we compared various projects that the same worker had applied in the past and had been paid for in the past, and with statistical methods trying to squeeze out the effect, the premium that an additional skill, that one specific skill might actually have on this premium. So the added value of a specific skill for the income of the worker. And this allows us to, for example, give a price tag to each of these skills, a premium tag. And you see another representation of these dots that we saw on the network earlier here on the right-hand side, now looking at the premium. So every dot, again, is a skill, and they are differently distributed. And we see actually very, very stark differences, very immense differences in terms of premium. So how much additional income in percentage a worker could generate when adding a specific skill, having a specific skill in her portfolio, with finance and legal skills being very valuable skills, and admin skills, for example, here on the right-hand side, software and tech and marketing skills somewhere in the middle. Now, with this price tag, with this price information, we could then go to and continue with the question that I proposed earlier and try to figure out what is it that makes a skill so valuable. So what defines the value of a specific skill? And what we find in our research is that it is very much about a concept that we here call complementarity. Complementarity, to put it very, very briefly, I mean, I invite you to have a look at our work, and maybe we can talk about it in the question and answer session. But complementarity in this sense is the flexibility of a skill being combinable with other skills. And we show this here, we contrast the premium, so the value of a skill, the price that a specific skill has, with this complementarity measure. And we see a very interesting and very stringent pattern that complementarity is very, very closely related to the value of a skill. Again, looking at the different dots, these orange dots, for example, are software and development skills, and we see legal and finance skills up here. So these skills up here in the top right, for example, of this graph, they have two things in common. They are both very, very valuable, and they have a very high complementarity. So you can combine them with a lot of other high value skills. And that is one of the things that we hypothesized in our work, that if a skill is combinable with a lot of other skills, if it's very agile, it has a high strategic value for workers. It has a high strategic value on labor markets, and has therefore also a very high premium, a very high price. Coming towards the end, we also investigated, as we don't start from zero, you know, when it comes to reskilling, as we all start with a specific skill set already. So we're not learning from scratch. We investigated how this complementarity is determined by the skills that people already have. And therefore, we contrasted the skills that workers already had with this new added skill, and whether this value, this added value of this new skill differed given a specific different starting point, a different original bundle of skills. And that is what we're seeing here, for example, on the left-hand side. What we found out is that throughout the board, if workers added a skill, had an additional skill that came from the same skill cluster where they've been working in before, so they've been adding, they topped up a portfolio of software development skills with another software development skills, in contrast to adding a writing and translation skill, for example, we saw that the premium on average is significantly higher once a skill is combined with skills of a similar type. And we see this in this matrix, which essentially reads, this is the x-axis is the domain where the worker has been before, the other skills that the worker has, and the y-axis is the skill community that this new skill comes from. And what we see is that the diagonal, is painted in green, which means that the diagonal, the adding a skill to the specific same portfolio, to the same type of skills, is throughout the board most profitable, or on average more profitable than sometimes adding skills from other domains. Just to give you one more outlook on what can be done with this data as well, it also allows us to look at the development of skills, of the prices of skills, the value of skills over time. So, for example, what we've been doing here, we've been contrasting different types of skills, and what we, for example, see here in the top panel is the value of specific skills, so the value of Python and the value of Java, comparing two programming languages.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's 2 minutes left.
Okay, perfect timing. Thank you. So we've tried to compare how the value of skills developed over time, and we compared skills for which we think that they are comparable. So, for example, Python and Java, or deep learning meaning applying software development, applying algorithms for processes like image recognition, for example, with statistics, or using a package like TensorFlow, which is often used in deep learning with something in the statistical realm, which is A/B testing. And what we see is that there are sizable developments over time. So skills do win and lose in value over time. And one of the other hypotheses that we had in our work is that this is not only due to complementarity, but it's also due to market forces. And these market forces are relatively obvious. They are supply and demand. You know, the more workers you have having a specific skill, proposing a specific skill in their portfolio, compared to the demand side, to buyers on these platforms demanding this skill, this results in a decrease of the value. This results in a decrease in terms of the simple market mechanism, the decrease of the value of the price of a specific skill. And this is also what we're seeing in this example. So, for example, looking at this spread between Python and Java, which 8 years ago were more or less on the same level in terms of their market value. Now, with Java deteriorating and Python increasing significantly in value, we can clearly relate this, in this example at least, to a change in demand and supply. So to a change in excess demand given a particular number of workers, and so as well for the other skills. So let me conclude on this. The starting point is that definitely something we can all relate to as researchers, but also I guess from personal life, is that technology changes our labor markets, and it changes the labor markets in the way that it changes the task composition. Old tasks become, some tasks become obsolete, new tasks are being demanded, and this calls for an agile way, more agile way of reskilling. How do we know which skills we should actually learn? Well, online generated data, and particularly online platform data, might be a very valuable resource. Not the only resource, of course. I mean, there's still human thinking involved in this, but might be a valuable additional resource to conventional reskilling that could be used in this case. And what we find in our initial research on this project is that the value of a skill, when trying to determine it, it strongly depends on complementarity, besides market forces like supply and demand, but it strongly depends on how well it can be combined with other skills. If you want to find more about this, have a look at our working paper. This is the link for those of you who are like QR codes like I do. Feel free to scan the code, and do reach out to me either on Twitter or via email and have a look at our project that has just started this September, where we hope to gather more interesting findings throughout the next 2 years on this topic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Fabian. That was tremendous. I suppose what's really interesting here is online platforms allow us to better identify skills with market value. I suppose the big issue is whether people who rely on platforms can actually access the skills, to access the training which will provide them with those skills. But anyway, we've got a few minutes for questions. There's a couple of questions in the chat relating to India about whether, do we know the gender share of platform workers? Also, is it mainly international or national companies that are providing these platforms, and whether workers have shared space, platform workers have shared spaces where they can work, which will sort of reduce their level of social isolation. But we'll try and group the questions together. I suppose one question I'm particularly interested in is whether, given the large number of young people who work on platforms, whether perhaps we're potentially storing up problems in the future, insofar as platforms are very efficient at matching people, but perhaps not so good at equipping them with skills and retraining, which, as I say, may be storing up problems for the future. But we have a couple of questions. Alexandra Webb and then Lena Rudat.
Yes, thank you very much. Really exciting and interesting presentations. I wondered whether Fabian could clarify this relationship between the kind of a market value of a skill versus how that relates to qualifications, because I wonder whether the research was done specifically on kind of a formal qualification levels, or is it kind of a self-perceived or just kind of a practice-based, or some skills that that actually comes out of people being involved in a specific project. So how is this kind of a qualification relates to that idea of a value, and how we evaluate those skills and increase in terms of a monetary gain?
Terence, should I get to this immediately, or should we collect questions first?
Let's just collect the questions first, and then we can. Lena Rudat, would you like to ask your question?
So I also have a question for Fabian and Stephanie. I was wondering how far you think your results on complementarity are working for the traditional labor market as well. Because I think in traditional labor markets, maybe if we hire someone long term, maybe I'm thinking for looking for someone who's also good at writing, you know, because maybe they want to move up to a management position or something. So I'm not sure, because you say that these online labor market data can be used to make wider you know, implications for the whole labor market. And I'm just wondering how far there's a limitation there.
Fabian, do you want to answer these two questions first, and then we'll move on to the more general questions about India, if that's okay?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to get to it. So Alexandra, first of all, that's a good question. So of course, so you rightly assume formal education definitely matters. The question is, though, you know, how things here coincide. So let me try to give you an example. This is not a result from this study, but it's a result from the general online labor market research that we've been doing at the OII. Some skills are simply more prevalent among people with higher levels of formal education. So it's much more likely, or to put it differently, if you find somebody who knows how to program in Python, has machine learning knowledge, it's much more likely that this person also has a relatively high formal degree, in particular when it comes to computer sciences. So these things definitely coincide. I'm not saying that everybody who has relatively in my definition, or in this definition, low value skills is a person with relatively speaking low level of formal education, but they do coincide to a certain extent. But having said that, we are not able to, in this specific platform, this is data from one specific online labor market platform, we're not able to observe the level of formal education, unfortunately. We've been trying, though, different metrics to end up with this measure of a skill value, and one of them also includes one of these metrics, one of these characteristics in the regression analysis that we've been doing is the experience of the worker. So at least to a certain extent, we're able to control for features other than just features that are more closely related to formal education. But we're also controlling for various other characteristics. Unfortunately, formal education is not part of it. We hope to change that. But maybe that's a good segue to Lena's question, actually, as well. Thanks for that. This is a very good point. If you remember the table that I showed, you know, with the different data sources and the advantages and disadvantages, online job postings, online job boards is one of these data sources, and that's explicitly the data source we're going to explore next. It does have the advantage that it covers the conventional economy. Almost all types of jobs. I mean, specific jobs are not advertised there, but I mean, it's definitely covering a much larger share of the labor market than online labor platforms, naturally speaking. But of course, it comes with the disadvantage that the price that is the price value that is contained there is just an asking price. It's an asking price by a firm. So a firm is advertising a specific position to hire an accountant, for example, and the firm says, okay, and this person will have salary X, will demand the following skills. It will get us closer, I think, to having a better understanding of what is going on the conventional labor market. But it comes with, it's a trade-off. It comes with shortcomings on the other end, because we're not able to observe a matchmaking. So we're not able to observe a price that has been finally agreed on. This could be a bit of wishful thinking by the company just posting a specific salary. But it's the two might complement each other. So I'm really curious what comes out of this second tranche of work.
So I'll take some of the questions addressed for our study, and I would then request my colleague, Professor S.K. Shashikumar, to take up other questions. The question on co-working spaces, yes, India has a lot of co-working spaces that have emerged, but at the same time, we need to keep in mind that a lot of online platform work is about individual work, where a lot of workers are working. They could be working for platforms located in the US, in Europe, in other countries in Europe, and so on, but they're working from the confines of their homes or at other places. So there is a challenge of being able to interact with other co-workers if you're working remotely. So that challenge is there. Yes, we have a lot of co-working spaces that have come up in India. We have a youth population, a great, huge youth population with a number of young people taking up employment opportunities in the gig and platform sector, accelerated by access to internet, access to smartphones. This opportunities in the sector also speak of changing attitudes towards work, especially for young people. Young people have preference, often have preference for work that is considered flexible. They want creative satisfaction. They want to try out different before they settle into one kind of job. So these are the kind of trends we see for India. I would also request my colleague, Professor S.K. Shajikumar, to add to this.
Yeah, thank you so much, ETF. It's really a privilege to be with all of you. Couple of things up front. It may be important when we look at the issues of skills or any other issues related to platforms in India to understand some basic characteristics of the platform sector. First and foremost, right now, an overwhelming proportion, at least what is documented, are location-based platforms. So you have transport and food delivery dominating. Okay. As a consequence of which, the moment you think of skills in that respect, you're talking of a fairly low level of skills. And even this is a question that is often posed: what kind of value addition can you provide in terms of skills to these workers? This is the first characteristic. The second characteristic is, as far as the location-based platforms are concerned, many of them are Indian-based, many of them. Especially if you look at food delivery systems, a lot of them, because that's one sector which has really expanded, not only to the urban space, but even to peripheral areas. That's why we think that even the estimates that we have made is quite an underestimation. I would think, as a student of labor studies, I would think that in another 5 years, we would have around 10% of the non-farm sector in India as platform workers, at least. This is the minimum that I feel that's going to be there. It's a huge size. And why it's important is because from a skills perspective, so, we have a very low level of formally certified skills personnel. It's just 5%. I mean, it's very, very low figure. As a consequence of which, when you look for jobs in the private sector or even public sector, jobs have almost dried up in India. There's hardly any employment growth in India as far as public sector is concerned. It's all private sector. There, what's happening is, say suddenly you see this is a sector where the entry is quite flexible. Entry is quite flexible. As a consequence of which, you see a lot of young guys moving into that sector, probably not necessarily having a certified skills, which they may not be able to do if you're going into for a, let's say, a manufacturing sector. That's not going to happen. As a consequence of which, even with the same level of skills, what they're getting is asset monetization, especially in both, like you have a two-wheeler, your asset gets monetized immediately. When you're in the delivery or when you're in the transport, the asset which was very idle gets monetized. So this is what is encouraging a lot of young people moving in. And our attempt was in the context of, the whole study was in the context of, we have a code on social security, probably for the first time that we have tried to define. That is also important. Unlike many of the developed countries or even many of the developing countries, India's labor market is a very differentially characterized labor market. You have only 20% as a regular wage earners, only 20%. You understand the point? Around or 22%, latest data. Another 22 or 23% are basically casual wage earners. And the remaining are self-employed. So then suddenly you have a new code coming in and trying to define platform worker, where nobody had an idea about how many are there. That's when all these estimates started gathering. People started using different kinds of figures. So we wanted to bring to the table some kind of understanding. Okay, this is the size that we're talking about. It's basically platform. It's basically platform, not very high skill gig. We have tried to avoid in our studies the high skill gig worker, because their characteristics are quite different. That's why, Stephanie, when we talk about, let's say, Python or certain other kinds of software skills that somebody has, that's not the kind of platform work that is proliferating in India. That's not the kind of proliferating in India. It is the low skill proliferation.
I'm sorry to interrupt. We're running out of time, so I just wanted to thank you very much for your intervention and mention that the report is very worthwhile reading. So I recommend everyone to read it. I'm sorry we can't take any more questions. I'd like now to hand over to Umahan Bardak, who will wrap up the today's presentations. But thank you very much, Fabian and Sakshi, for superb presentations. Thank you.
Thank you very much also from my side for all the presenters, because this was really extremely interesting. And I wish we could have a bit longer time, but definitely I am pretty sure that our network members will read your papers because now that they heard a lot of interest is already raised, and maybe, who knows, in the future, we find opportunities to work together. Anyway, I think this webinar has been just an opening window of a big new world, and we still have a lot of things to research, to discuss, to learn about the platform economy. It's all freshly starting. We are just in the very beginning, as I could see. But we have to accept that despite all the criticism around platform economy, especially linked to the social security aspects, unclear legal positions of the work, etc., it presents a great opportunity, especially in terms of lacking entry barriers, even for the low skilled, as we saw in the case of India. And I especially would like to thank you for these very different examples from different parts of the world, because I think India is, at least for the case of India, it has been one of the key leaders in the world with a couple of other Asian countries, and it's always interesting to learn. Well, in terms of skills, I mean, skills requirements that was presented by Fabian, it was also very fascinating to me, at least, because I think for the first time we are talking about using these the big data also for the skill needs for the online workers, platform, online labor market workers. But I think the question still stands about whether the specific skills requirements are overlapping for online workers versus offline workers. That is a great question to be answered in the future research, I hope. Well, coming back to our own partner countries and our own research with the Eastern European countries as well as Western Balkan countries, I think that we have a kind of advantage, at least for these regions, being so close to Europe and at the same time following the developments at the European level, such as this draft regulation for the platform workers, which is proposed now, maybe also for colleagues from India is worth looking at it, how the working conditions and everything, legal aspects are dealt with it, despite many criticisms at the same time made by European trade unions. I'm aware of that. Well, at least for the neighboring countries in this region, I think following more or less the developments at the EU level could be inspiring and easier to follow, also link with sometimes membership perspective, EU accession perspective. But at the same time, we should be still aware of all the new developments worldwide, including the dynamic Asian economies. So I would like to stop here. I don't want to take very long time of, it was already more than 2.5 hours of this webinar. But I would like to announce you 2 things. One is you will receive a short summary of the discussions today, all the participants, with the links shared here, so that you will have access to read further. And if you want to get further discussion, further exchange, either with ETF or with the network members, which most of them shared their details, please get in contact with us or directly with the members whose contact details are available already, because this is all we want as ETF. More exchange, continuous cooperation, even maybe inspiring inspirations for future joint work, collaborations. So I stop here. I think that's all for now.
Thank you very much. Just to say goodbye to everybody, and thank you very much for being with us. I shared the link of the open space in the chat, so please register. You will find all the documents of today's webinar, and also you will have access to the previous material we have developed in the past events. And as Mohan said, please reach out, get in touch, feel free to post your comments or to share your research on the platform, and we will take it from there. Thank you very much to all, and have a nice day.